Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Ethan Learens, and I'm a researcher at the Jerusalem Institute of Justice. Before we begin our lecture today on the major milestones in the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, I would like to tell you shortly about the Jerusalem Institute of Justice. The JIJ is a leading legal research institute that strives to uphold human rights in the Middle East and safeguard the legitimate standing of the State of Israel among the nations. Our International Law and Public Diplomacy Department operates both in the international legal and public diplomacy arenas. The JIJ is proud to hold the most prestigious consultative status to the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations for our contribution to the protection of human rights. It has earned the dubious title of being the most complex conflict in the world, the Israeli-Arab conflict that dates back to the 1860s. Over the years, Israel has made many efforts to reach an agreement that would bring a solution and relief, been repeatedly rejected by the Palestinian leadership. This dynamic shaped the idea that to resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict, Israel must first reach a peace agreement with the leadership. The Abraham Accord 2020 between the United Emirates, Morocco and Sudan proved. These recent agreements present new options for peace in the Middle East, according to which Israel is no longer dependent on signing a peace agreement with the Palestinians in order to pave the way for peace and normalization of the relationships with moderate Arab countries in the region. This paradigm shift affects the balance of powers at the negotiation table and weakens the position of the Palestinian leadership. In today's session, I want us to get a look at the peacemaking process and attempts that have taken place over the years. With me today is Lydia Morgan, the COO of the Jerusalem Institute of Justice. Welcome, Lydia.
Good afternoon, Ethan. Thank you. I'm glad to be with you discussing this important topic. The Israeli-Palestinian peace process is indeed full of complexities and obstacles. Even former U.S. President Bill Clinton, during an interview in 2000 regarding the Camp David summit that defined the principles for future negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian leadership, said, "My God, it's hard. It's unlike anything I've ever faced."
Lydia, we constantly hear about a solution based on the Green Line. So can you please start by explaining what that actually means?
Sure. In 1948, following the rapid withdrawal of the UK, the forces of the newly established State of Israel fought a coordinated attack by the armies of 5 Arab nations. This was the First Arab-Israeli War, also known as Israel's War of Independence. The war ended in armistice agreements in 1949 with a temporary demarcation border, or line. This line indicates what is usually referred to as pre-1967 lines, or the Green Line. When officials refer to the pre-1967 borders, what they actually mean is the 1949 Armistice Line. And by the way, it is called the Green Line simply because it was drawn in green marker on the printed maps before the Six-Day War.
Thank you. So, for over 50 years, the peace process, or attempts to achieve a long-lasting agreement with the Palestinians, included both official and unofficial talks, directly and through various intermediaries. So, Lydia, could you please elaborate on these steps Israel took after the Six-Day War in order to broker peace?
After the Six-Day War in 1967, during which Israel gained the Golan Heights and the West Bank, the Security Council, Resolution 242, called for the end of Israeli-Palestinian conflict based on territorial and the solution of the situation. When passed this resolution, the Israeli government had already begun its efforts for peace with the help of the United States. Vice Prime Minister Yigal Allon had put forward the Allon Plan, suggesting the division of Judea and Samaria and the Gaza Strip between Israel and Jordan, or the Palestinians in the area. The Allon Plan was introduced in 1967 and served for negotiations with the Palestinian leadership.
So this seems forward. What was the Palestinian?
The Arab countries, the leaders of the Palestinians, did not support it. The Jordanians wanted to the West Bank, while the PLO, or Palestinian Liberation Organization, Greater Palestine that would be connected to Jordan. As a matter of fact, at the Arab Summit in 1967, Palestinians enacted the three no's: no peace, no negotiations, and no recognition of Israel.
Palestinian opposition expanded after the 1973 Yom Kippur War. The PLO adopted the 10-point plan, calling for the liberation of Palestine through armed struggle for Judea and Samaria to create an independent national authority, continuing the efforts to establish a Palestinian state in the borders of the Mandate, and by gaining control over the Israeli territory with the help of Arab nations. In 1975, after the civil war in Lebanon, the PLO opened headquarters and began operating against Israel from there. In response to an attempted assassination of an Israeli diplomat in 1982, Israel's military entered Lebanon, taking control over the southern part in an effort to drive out the Palestinian terrorist groups. An agreement was made between Lebanon and Israel, enacting a phased withdrawal of Israeli troops between 1983 and 1985. The withdrawal had left a security buffer at the south of Lebanon, controlled by the IDF.
Yes, and the PLO wasn't the only Palestinian organization that gained power during that time. In the 1980s, a new group was rising, the terror organization Hamas. Hamas was even more militaristic than the PLO. The organization was focused on a religious, far right-wing platform, promising to defeat Israel by military means only.
Despite the opposition, Israel kept trying to promote peace with the other Arab nations.
For example, Israel and Egypt managed to find common ground for peace. Anwar Sadat, the Egyptian president, gave a historic speech at the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, and he said, "I have declared more than once that Israel has become an established fact, recognized by the entire world." Following this statement, Israel and Egypt signed a formal peace treaty in 1979.
Perhaps the most meaningful peacemaking efforts took place in the 1990s, culminating in the Oslo Accords. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. The process leading to the Oslo Accords started at the Madrid Conference in 1991. In the days after the First Gulf War, the American administration believed that a real window of opportunity had opened for the advancement of negotiations. Some voices were heard on the Palestinian side as well. Salah Khalaf, also known as Abu Ayad, who served as vice to Yasser Arafat, explained that the new situation, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, opens new avenues for peace and the Israel-Palestinian cooperation. A foreign policy article noted that turbulent as these times are, the Palestinian people and their representative, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, see new prospects for peace in the Middle East, as the tide of change in the Soviet Union swept away obsolete notions and structures.
In fact, it was American President George Bush, together with the President of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, who convened the conference, to which representatives of the governments of Israel, led by Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, and Jordan were invited.
We know that the Madrid Conference was one that paved the way for direct negotiations between Israel and Palestinians in the following years.
Yes, two important things came out of the Madrid Conference. One was the fact that Arab countries, for the first time, officially recognized the existence of the State of Israel, and the second was the infrastructure that was laid for the existence of two official channels for the Israeli-Arab peace process. The bilateral channel, in which the State of Israel holds negotiations with each Arab side separately, and the multilateral channel, where discussions are held in wider forums on issues of importance to more than one country. Under the auspices of the Norwegian government, a channel was opened for a series of direct and secret meetings between Israel and the Palestinian leadership. The Oslo Accords are actually a series of agreements signed by the State of Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO.
At this point, it's worth mentioning that the Oslo Accords created a rift in the people of Israel. To this day, 30 years later, the Oslo Accords are still a major point of contention in Israeli society and politics.
Indeed. We can't forget that this fracture in Israeli society is what led to the assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin in 1995.
Definitely a tragic and shocking event that will remain in the memory of all of us. Going back to the Oslo Accords, I want us to dive into the outline of the agreement.
The first agreement was signed in August 1993, in which the State of Israel and Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin recognized the PLO as legal and legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. The Rabin government also undertook to repeal the law prohibiting meetings with PLO members and the declaration of the PLO as a terrorist organization. The PLO, under the leadership of Yasser Arafat, agreed to recognize the State of Israel as having the right to exist in peace and security by ending terrorism and ending the conflict peacefully. They also agreed to accept Resolution 242 of the UN Security Council.
Interesting. And besides the statements, what did the agreement itself include?
It included an Israeli decision to withdraw from the Palestinian areas in the Gaza Strip and Jericho region, and to later on transfer the territories of Judea and Samaria and the Gaza Strip to the responsibility of the Palestinian Authority, which was to be established for an interim period of 5 years.
What did that mean for Israelis living in these areas?
Israel was to remain responsible for their safety.
And what were the next steps according to the agreement?
Both parties agreed that no later than 3 years after Israel's withdrawal as stipulated, the parties would work to achieve a permanent agreement in which the key issues in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict would be resolved, including the status of Jerusalem, Palestinian refugees, settlements, and security. This permanent arrangement would be made on the basis of Resolutions 242 and 338 of the UN Security Council.
So let's take a look at the Second Oslo Agreement. It was signed in Washington in September 1995, and the decision was dramatic. In fact, it included the transfer of control to the Palestinian hands for the very first time. Israel granted the Palestinians self-government in the Palestinian cities of Judea and Samaria and in the Gaza Strip.
The agreement actually divided the territories of Judea and Samaria and the Gaza Strip into 3 different categories or 3 administrative zones. Area A, where the Palestinian Authority is responsible for both civil and security matters in 18% of the overall relevant territories. Then we have Area B, which applied to 22% of the territories, where the PA administers only civil matters, while security remains under Israel's control. And then there's Area C, which is 60% of the territories, where Israel maintains full control, meaning both civil and security. That is until further agreements would be achieved.
About a week after the signing of the agreement, Rabin, who in those days understood the tension that prevailed in Israeli society, explained that the goal of the Israeli government was to prevent the creation of a bi-national state by establishing an independent Palestinian entity that is less than a state alongside the State of Israel. A month later, Rabin was assassinated by an ultra-nationalist Israeli that was opposed to the signing of the Oslo Accords. Shimon Peres, Rabin's successor, continued the implementation of the Oslo II agreement and transferred the control of Palestinian cities in Judea and Samaria to the Palestinian Authority. A few months later, in 1996, Benjamin Netanyahu became Israel's prime minister. During his first term, he signed 2 agreements with the Palestinian Authority, the Hebron Protocol and the Wye River Memorandum.
Yes, the Hebron Protocol acted within the guidelines of the Oslo Agreement on the redistribution of control in Hebron in areas A and C, giving 80% of Hebron to the administration of the Palestinian Authority, and the Wye River Memorandum, under which Israel withdrew 13% of the territory of Judea and Samaria in exchange for the deletion of clauses in the PLO Charter which called for the destruction of Israel. However, the latter agreement was frozen due to political pressure by Netanyahu's coalition. This freeze, in fact, caused the Israeli government to collapse.
However, this was not the end of this specific arrangement. In 1999, Prime Minister Ehud Barak, Netanyahu's successor, and Yasser Arafat signed the Sharm el-Sheikh Memorandum, which could be viewed as an amended version of the Wye River Memorandum. The new memorandum included 11 points. Most importantly, the resumption of negotiations for permanent status and the transfer of territory from Area C to Areas B and A and Hebron. The agreement came to fruition on some issues, mostly on territorial transfer, which, while turbulent, was successfully completed in 2000. Moving forward to the 2000s, Ehud Barak continued peacemaking attempts as part of the Sharm el-Sheikh Memorandum.
Yes, the Camp David Peace in the Middle East Conference was held in July 2000 at Camp David in Maryland. It was chaired by U.S. President Bill Clinton, together with the Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak and the chairman of the Palestinian Authority, Yasser Arafat. 4 main issues were at the center of the discussions. 1. How the Palestinian territory would look in the future. 2. The issue of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. 3. The issue of Palestinian refugees and the right of return. And 4. The issue of Israeli security arrangements.
On the question of the status of Jerusalem, which holds extraordinary importance for both sides, we know that Barak was willing to divide Jerusalem.
Yes, he was. Barak's proposal included the annexation to Israel of territories located beyond the 1967 borders, such as Ma'ale Adumim and Givat Ze'ev. In exchange, Israel offered to transfer to the Palestinian Authority Palestinian villages or small towns that had been annexed to Jerusalem after 1967. The Palestinians rejected the idea.
And what about the Palestinian claim for territories?
Barak's offer was very generous. Barak offered the Palestinians as a starting point 73% of the territories of Judea and Samaria and the entire Gaza Strip. And within 10 to 25 years, the Palestinian area was supposed to expand in its dimensions up to 90% of Judea and Samaria. This generous offer was also rejected by the Palestinians, who insisted on acquiring 100% of the territory.
And on the matter of the Palestinian claim for the right of return.
So the Palestinians stood by their demand for a full right of return. Israel, on the other hand, raised the demographic argument and the threat to Israel's identity as a Jewish state. Barak, nevertheless, offered to allow limited numbers of refugees to return to Israel.
To conclude, the 2 weeks discussions at the Camp David conference ended with a failure to bring any positive result. Instead, it led to the start of the Second Intifada, with a sharp increase of Palestinian mass protests, terror, and suicide bombing. It also caused a severance of the relationship between the parties. Bill Clinton blamed Yasser Arafat for the failure of the summit. A few months later, in 2001, George W. Bush entered office. During his term, Bush put forth his vision for solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, called the Roadmap for Peace.
Yes, President Bush presented a gradual solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Under the supervision of the Quartet, set up in 2002, which consists of the United Nations, the European Union, the United States, and Russia. The plan set an ambitious goal according to which within 3 years the parties would reach a final and complete solution to the conflict. Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon announced his support for Bush's plan.
So, President Bush's plan was laid out in 3 stages. First stage, both sides would make a genuine recognition of the other side. The Palestinians would reform its institutions. Israel would freeze the construction of settlements in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, and retreat from cities that were taken control of during the Second Intifada. The second stage of President Bush's plan included the creation of a Palestinian state with temporary borders. The third stage would create a permanent peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinian state. But President Bush's peace plan also failed.
Indeed, and this is despite the fact that both parties gave their consent in principle to the outline.
Yes, but even though Israel accepted President Bush's plan, it also sent the Israeli cabinet statement on the roadmap and 14 reservations, which was a list of issues to be addressed by the US.
Among them was Israel's demand not to discuss the Israeli settlements in Judea and Samaria, as well as the status of the Palestinian Authority and its institutions in Jerusalem. The U.S. agreed to address Israel's comments in the 14 reservations fully and seriously, but in fact never gave them any binding political validity.
To conclude, the plan became deadlocked during the first stage. Hamas rejected the roadmap and continued terrorist violence against Israelis, while Israel did not freeze the construction of settlements. With no genuine intent by either party to implement the plan proposed by President Bush, this plan was doomed to fail.
Prime Minister Ariel Sharon became frustrated with the deadlock, stating, "There exists no Palestinian partner with whom to advance peacefully toward a settlement." Following this, Sharon decided on a unilateral withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, as well as several Jewish settlements in the Jenin area. This was done in the hopes of advancing peace and creating a stable system for political independence. The decision required the dismantling of all Jewish settlements in the Gaza area. However, this move in fact led to Hamas's win in the 2006 Palestinian Authority elections, the loss of control by the Palestinian Authority, and an increase in violence against Israel.
Another attempt to broker peace was made by Prime Minister Ehud Olmert during the Annapolis Conference in 2007. Olmert's suggestions included annexing major Jewish populations in Judea and Samaria, while giving adjacent territory to a state of Palestine, including a continuous land corridor with Gaza. However, this peace effort was thwarted by continued terrorist activities and the constant threat of missiles from Gaza against Israeli civilians, which resulted in the start of Operation Cast Lead. Since the failure of the Annapolis Conference, there were several additional attempts to broker peace between Israel and the Palestinians, none of which yielded results, like the attempt made by former US President Barack Obama in September 2010, the attempt of the former Secretary of State of the United States, John Kerry, in 2013, and the attempt by the President of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, in 2014.
The latest initiative was made by former US President Donald Trump. President Trump's peace initiative has been named Peace to Prosperity. It was first published in January 2020. The plan proposed a two-state solution with a corridor between Judea and Samaria and the Gaza Strip through an underground tunnel. According to the plan, the Palestinian state would be established on an area of about 70% of the territories of Judea and Samaria. Israel would exercise sovereignty over 30% of the territories of Judea and Samaria. Additionally, the Jordan Valley and the northern Dead Sea would be annexed to Israel. Areas A and B, according to the plan, were designated for Palestinian sovereignty. The initiative even included a plan for a significant expansion of the Gaza Strip and the right of return of Arab Palestinian refugees to the future Palestinian state.
The plan offered the Palestinians a significant grant as well.
That's right. According to the plan, the Palestinians were entitled to a grant of $50 billion for the establishment of the new Palestinian state.
And what did the plan stipulate regarding Jerusalem?
Regarding Jerusalem, the plan called for maintaining the status quo in the Old City and the Temple Mount under Israeli sovereignty.
And what were the responses to Trump's plan on both sides?
The Palestinian leadership strongly rejected Trump's initiative and made a public statement announcing that the Palestinians would reject any cooperation with Trump regarding the promotion of a deal with Israel, and that the United States is not a fair mediator in the conflict, and the Palestinian leadership would refuse to cooperate with the Trump administration in forming the deal. Despite Netanyahu's statement that he in fact accepted Trump's deal, harsh criticism was heard in Israel, both from the religious Zionist sector, which opposed the establishment of a Palestinian state altogether, and from the Israeli left, which felt that the plan was one-sided and that the Palestinians would be disadvantaged if the deal were to be implemented.
Thank you, Lydia. So to review today, we got a glimpse into the many unsuccessful attempts at peace. We covered the start of the peacemaking attempts from 1967, directly after the Six-Day War, the acceleration in the 90s, culminating with the Oslo agreements, and their eventual collapse, and the recent attempts since the 2000s by various prime ministers and officials.
Ethan, the Palestinians surely are not the only ones to blame for the failure of peace attempts over the years. But one thing is clear: they have refused to adopt any outline that has been presented, including very generous offers. There is no doubt that at the root of the conflict are consequential and very weighty issues. It is difficult to see a solution that will be agreeable to both parties. I hope that we will have peace in my lifetime. Thank you all for joining Ethan and I today, and we hope to see you. We hope you will join us during our next webinar.